Welcome.
Okay.
This is
It's like
the
participatory.
fifth and last in our series of panels around the topic of good food. Many of you have heard one or more of the previous ones. This is our wrap-up panel. So just to recapitulate very quickly, we started out with the notion of wanting to understand what good food means, what a good food system might entail. We relied on the work funded by the Kellogg Foundation, which suggested that key attributes of a good food system would be that it provided food that was healthy, affordable, fair, and green. So our previous four panels have all been devoted to one of those four aspects. We had several presenters at each one of those panels, drawn from many different disciplines around campus, different perspectives, different experiences, each of whom contributed some definition and elaboration of what healthy food, for example, might be, affordable food, and so on. Today, we have a very exciting panel whose purpose is to help us sort of put things back together. We took that concept apart, and now we want to try to put it back together, look at it from a slightly different angle. So we've invited some young people, young scholars and practitioners who are, of course, very heavily invested in the future of the food system, both personally and professionally. And so I, for one, am very excited to hear what they have to say. I'm going to introduce each of them, and then they will present. Our format today is a little bit different from what it's been in previous weeks. So each of our panelists will present briefly, or not so briefly, today. And then we will have the audience divide itself into 5 groups, and one of our panelists will join each group. And those groups will be organized around topics, which I'll explain in a minute. And then you'll have the opportunity to have some discussion amongst yourselves, and then we'll come back together and hear from you what you've come up with in your small groups. And yes, there will be refreshments at the end of all that, so I hope you'll stick with us for the whole program. A couple of business matters before I get to the introduction of the panelists. There was a sign-in sheet, which if you didn't sign in on the way in, I hope you will get to that at some point in time. There's a flyer describing this program and naming our panelists, and there's a sheet of questions. The sheet of questions is particularly important, and if I could give you one little bit of instruction or a plea for a certain kind of help with respect to those questions. The first 2 questions are ones that it might be worth bearing in mind during the presentations, maybe jotting down a few notes as you go along so that you can use that in the small group discussions. The 3rd, 4th, and 5th questions on the handout are what we hope you will try to touch on in those small group discussions. So for the moment, just focus on the first 2 if you would, and we'll get to the others later. Okay? All right. Let me start then. I'll introduce the panelists in the order in which they will present, beginning with Leslie Tuzo. Leslie has a bachelor's degree in art history from Washington University in St. Louis. She's worked for the last 5 years as a vegetable farmer. She is currently a research specialist at Bradford Research Center studying vegetable production in no-till systems, and she is the co-owner of the Salad Garden, a certified organic farm producing, I might add from personal experience, fantastic food in Ashland, Missouri. Leslie is going to come at this from the perspective of a producer. So that is one of the groups that we'll have. The group she'll join has to do with the producer's perspective. Next, Joseph Dalgano. Joe works in commercial agriculture within the University of Missouri Extension. His focus is research into perennial grass cropping systems used as a renewable energy source. Joe volunteers at the Columbia Farmers Market, working in the Access to Healthy Foods initiative to help low-income families afford nutritious local produce. Before coming to Columbia, Joe was a Peace Corps volunteer in Cape Verde, West Africa, where he worked in a number of projects, including a microfinance institute helping small farmers there, and also worked there with the community to build a school garden. Last May, Joe earned his Master of Science degree here in agricultural economics. He also holds a Bachelor of Arts degree from Boston College in economics and history. Joe will address his remarks from perspective of consumer perception. Next, Label-Hong Moore graduated from Marymount Manhattan College with a Bachelor of Fine Arts in Dance Performance. She served also as a Peace Corps volunteer. Label was in Bolivia and Peru, where she worked with agriculture and HIV/AIDS prevention and awareness. She came to Mizzou a little over a year ago as a Paul D. Coverdell Peace Corps Fellow. Label studies the effect of urban farming on the landscape. She will come at this from the perspective of place or landscape. That will be her group. Next, Matt Jernigan graduated from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill with a Bachelor of Science in Environmental Health. In 2011, he visited southern Mexico to study grassroots social change and sustainability. And since returning, Matt has been actively involved with the food movement in North Carolina, working on various small-scale diversified farms, both educational and production-based. In August, he came here to take an AmeriCorps Vista position with the Columbia Farmers Market, where he now works to promote local food production and education in the Columbia area. Matt will come at this from the perspective of ownership or control. And finally, Chris Murakami is a PhD candidate in science education. Chris studies how people learn about food and food systems throughout their lifespan. He's particularly interested in teaching through a socio-scientific issues framework and facilitating communities of practice. He has a bachelor's degree in biological sciences from the University of Southern California, and he taught 8th grade science in Los Angeles for 3 years as a Teach for America volunteer. He is an urban farmer with demonstrating community agriculture and a garden educator at the MU Children's Learning Garden. Chris's perspective then will be learning. So you can see we have quite an array of panelists, so I will get out of the way and let them present their thoughts to you.
So as Martha said, I'm Leslie, and I am a research specialist at Bradford Research Center. I'm also a certified organic vegetable producer, and I'm going to try and stand up straight. This is really uncomfortable. Can you hear me if I stand this way? Yeah? Okay. So as I listened to the panels over the last 4 weeks, I heard a lot of really good things. I heard a lot of fascinating takes on the problems in our food system. What I didn't hear a lot of was the voice of the farmer, the producer. And those are the people, who are responsible for growing and raising the food that we consume. So to me, this begs the question, how do we define good food from the perspective of the farmer or the producer? So what is healthy, what is affordable, what is fair, and what is green from the farmer's perspective? So a little bit about me. I'm a vegetable grower. I'm an organic vegetable grower. And I'm also coming at this from kind of the organic perspective. I'll talk a little bit about organic in the next few slides, but I'm only doing that because most of the data that's available on the organic food growth movement is charted through certified organic operations. But really there are there's thousands of other farms that are using organic practices, but they're not certified, that are transitioning to organic practices or that are using sustainable practices, however you want to define that. So this is the official definition of what organic agriculture is. Organic can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. For me as a producer, it means growing and using production methods that don't use synthetic chemicals and that keep in mind kind of the ecosystem health and the environmental health of my land. So these next few slides are just, I'm going to go through them kind of quickly because I only have 5 or 6 minutes up here. But I'm attempting to try and show you that, this organic movement has been growing and will continue to grow because there's an interest from the consumers to have a product that is produced in a sustainable way. So as you can see, we're looking here at the sale of organic products. That is, that continues to grow every single year. The amount of acreage that is being used for certified organic operations continues to grow. This is just a look at this bottom left map here shows all of the farms in the country, and the top, of course, is all of the organic farms in the country. And then this is a look at the current organic producers and their 5-year plan. So you can see 78% of the current producers plan to either maintain their production or increase their organic production. So there's definitely a desire to grow more food using organic practices. And then finally, the consumer's take on all this, they want organic food. So I think the most striking statistic here is that 78% of US families are buying some form of organic food. And that says to me, people are not only buying food because it tastes a certain way, but also because they're interested in the production methods. So, you know, we have this rising trend in organic agriculture. However, there's lots of challenges. As a farmer, I know all these challenges. The biggest thing for the organic producers in the whole is the production expenses. The majority of that is labor expenses. I think it's $589 million of expenses were spent on labor for organic farmers in the last census. There's also risk. There's risk inherent in any farming operation. There's weather, there's pests, there's disease. As an organic farmer, that risk is a little bit more because we're not using those chemicals that could help combat some of that. Then there's market access, especially for people who are growing in rural communities, and they may not have a market to take their produce and get it sold. And then finally, there's the perception by the consumer that organic food is elitist, that it's unaffordable, that it's only meant for upper middle class whole food shoppers. So this is just to kind of look at, you know, we see this growing trend, but, you know, we also have these challenges, and for some reason, there's still, organic farmers are still having a hard time being sustainable in terms of being able to continue their business for the long term, being able to make enough money off of that farming enterprise to continue on for the long term. So, you know, I think it's striking to say that 67% of organic farmers just in Missouri have some kind of off-farm income. They have some second job, and so that tells me that we're not supporting our organic farmers enough for them to be able to make enough money doing what they do. So that you know, that brings me to this question: if we have obviously a desire to have organic food or to have food that's produced in sustainable ways, how are we then going to ensure that those farms that are producing those things are both environmentally sustainable and also financially viable? How are we going to make sure that they can make enough money to keep going and support their families? So of the four definitions of good food, fair, affordable, healthy, and green, fair struck me as something that is really kind of a question to look at. When I went into the fair panel, I was sure I was going to hear talks about fair trade. When I hear fair in food, I think fair trade. I think coffee, I think chocolate, I think, you know, Florida tomato pickers. And that was kind of that was absent from that discussion. So, you know, that begs the question then, what is fair for the producer? What is fair for the laborer? Does that mean that we, you know, talk about that the producer's getting a fair price for their food? Fair price meaning taking into consideration the costs that it takes to produce that. What about living wage? Are producers getting are producers earning enough money to support their families? For the laborers, are they working in conditions that are acceptable, in living conditions that are acceptable? And then finally, just kind of a last question to ponder. If there has, you know, since I've noticed that there was a kind of discrepancy between the consumer aspect and the producer aspect, so the consumer being what a lot of the panels addressed, the idea of good food. Why is there this kind of difference? And how do we value that relationship between the producer and the consumer? As consumers, are we interested in knowing who our producers are? Are we interested in supporting our producers? And then, especially with the fair and the affordable aspects of good food, I found, you know, the question that came back to me always was, you know, if we're trying to create something that's affordable for the consumer, is that also something that's fair for the producer? And so when you're looking at the producer versus the consumer, are there these tensions between the different definitions of what we have decided that good food is? So that's that. Joe?
Should I go over there?
So I don't have a PowerPoint.
So let me turn this down.
and I'll just stand here and talk. I should say that I missed the fair panel and the affordable panel, although I did hear a lot about the affordable panel. And mixed into these panels, I also went to one organized by the U.S. Farmers and Ranchers Alliance. So some of the reason behind my question comes from that panel as well. So I begin with what I see as a paradox. During these panels, we have heard about great strides in conventional agriculture over the past 30 years, roughly. Yet, there's still significant resistance to this production system. So my question is just why? Why is there still such a resistance? Although we've had great strides. I mean, we talked about, during the green panel, some environmental improvements, better land use, improved tillage, which sequesters carbon and biodiversity, improves soil, decreases erosion. These are very significant strides. During the healthy panel, the panelists seemed to agree that there really was no difference between organic, locally produced vegetables and something that was grown conventionally in Chile. Although I'm slightly skeptical of that, that's kind of what the conclusion I came to after that panel. And certainly during the affordable panel, there was quite a bit of discussion about how food is unaffordable in our system, yet conventional agriculture has done a very, very, very good job of decreasing food prices over the past 30 years and providing food in the U.S. that's always available, that's accessible, that sort of consistent supply. It's a huge, huge factor. So essentially my question of why the resistance to conventional agriculture deals with consumer perceptions in kind of what factors lead a consumer to perceive one production system better than another.
Hi. All right. Slideshow. Awesome. Okay. Hi, I'm Lebo. And I just want to thank you all for being here. I also want to thank all of you for inviting me to be part of this discussion, and especially thank the people who created these great flyers that we have been using this whole time, I think. Thanks is due there. So we're all here because we've been discussing food and what good food is. To me, good food is food that's good for us and good for the world. So I want to start out with this Wendell Berry quote to kind of help frame my perspective. We have lived our lives by the assumption that what was good for us would be good for the world. We have been wrong. We must change our lives so that it will be possible to live by the contrary assumption that what is good for the world will be good for us. And that requires that we make the effort to know the world and learn what is good for it. So I can't claim to know the world, but I have been to a lot of places. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about my experience in those places. And I specifically want to highlight 3 things that I've gleaned from the panels and then also gleaned from my own experience. So place matters, especially when you're talking about food and you're talking about land use. I also think that knowledge is derived in a variety of different ways, and we need to honor those different ways. And I also think that women and indigenous and peasant societies need to be included in this discussion to a much greater extent. So one of the goals in these panels was talking about creating place-based food systems or food networks. And my question is, have we really talked about what a place-based food system is? And what is a place-based food network? In geography, we studied human-environment interactions and the resulting places that are created. So when you're talking about agriculture, you're definitely creating places because of those systems of production and consumption. Do we have a place-based system currently? I think so. I think that we have a place-based food system that's been created by a history of colonial exchange. I think that it's a food system that has been bolstered by a neoliberal market. I think it's a place-based food system that currently rests in the hands of developed nations. And I think it's a food system that pretends like it can be replicated around the world in many different places. It's a centralized food system, and it has contributed to a great deal, has contributed to anthropogenic climate change, a great deal. It's a neo-colonial food-based system that's broken, I think. So how do we create different place-based systems? Do we need one? Do we need many that can work together? What's missing from these systems so that they're viable and efficient in a globalized world? I think Matt is going to address some of those specific systems and give us some good examples. And the good news is that there are alternatives, but they're just not supported. They're not supported financially, they're not supported academically, they're not supported culturally. As for academics, I don't want to critique the usefulness and the benefit of academic research, but I do want to highlight that the way we as scholars here in the States understand what knowledge is only one way that knowledge is created. And knowledge is created in so many different ways, and those processes, I think, need to be brought into the conversation. So I suggest and know that we need to combine our methodologies. We need to combine these scholarly pursuits with methodologies of indigenous people, methodologies of peasant people living in areas around the world, in order to develop new innovative technologies and also work with existing age-old systems. So when I was in Zambia, I worked with this guy, his name's Simeon, and we grew beans for and with patients of a pediatric AIDS clinic. And it was rough, let me tell you, because I was there during the dry season, which meant that we had 3 sprinklers for about half an acre of land, and we had to move them around to water all of the different plants. It was not fun, but we did it, and I ended up having to push beans on everybody I knew, on my neighbors, on my friends, on my family. But we also sold some of our vegetables to small places like Coachella, which is a church-run group that collected and sold farm fresh produce. We also ate a lot of nshima, which is a cornmeal-based paste, really, which doesn't make it sound delicious, but it's good. Relish, which is a mix of greens, and a lot of fried chicken. Oh, wait, okay. So the other thing that I learned when I was in Zambia was that China is buying land in Zambia. And China is buying land and leasing land from the government in exchange for building roads and football stadiums. Why? Because of this. This is a picture of the Gansu province in China, western province in China. The sign says protecting the environment is everybody's responsibility. The sign is also in the same location where a lake was 50 years ago. Don't worry, it's not just China. This is Peru. This picture was taken in 2008. This is showing the extreme effects of glacial ice cap and permafrost melting. This is also in Peru, north of Lima, where you can see they're growing a lot of things in the desert. Now, the scientific term for this is desertification. All of the areas in red are at extreme vulnerable rates of desertification in the world. And what's creating these, or what's promoting some of these vulnerabilities, is our agricultural systems, our changes of the landscape in all of these different places. Does anybody know what, who the world's largest exporter of asparagus is? It's Peru. And they're growing it here in the desert. So I lived in Peru for 1.5 years, and I never ate asparagus, not once. And I never talked to anybody who could tell me that they were directly benefiting from a huge agricultural export in that country. So would I say that Peru has a place-based food system that supports their local economy, that supports their farmers, that supports their traditional foodways? No, I don't think so. I think they're connected to this colonial place-based food system that we've created. And also, by the way, we grow asparagus in Missouri. Why are we importing it from Peru? Huge question. So in Bolivia, these kids taught me how to make compost. They taught me how to plant apple trees. In Peru, this is my host mom. She taught me all about coffee and how to grow it. And these women here, my host mom and my sister, my host sister, taught me how to make meals for hundreds of people in that tiny kitchen and to serve meals for the entire community. And to eat things like this, papaloancaina and fried rice. These women in Minneapolis taught me how to make mole verde. They taught me how wonderful it is to cook with a community of immigrants, to share recipes, let their kids run around, let them build communities. And Hmong farmers on the east side of St. Paul, Minnesota, taught me that a sliver of land can produce a bounty of food. Oops. They're proving that farming is a way to connect to the landscape, it's a way to connect to other people, and it's definitely transforming the places that we live in. People know what's good for the place that they inhabit. They know how to grow food, cook it, eat it, share it, save it. We need to listen to them. We need to let them make decisions about how they're going to do this. We need to not structure how they're going to grow their own food. We need not to incentivize their food systems based on Western ideals, cultures, and money. And then we need to build our own place-based food system here in the United States that addresses issues here in Columbia, in Missouri, in the States, that affect our people, our families, our friends. We also need to make sure that we incorporate local indigenous knowledge, knowledge from here in our local communities. And we also need to address voices that have not been heard from very much in the past in shaping these landscapes. Voices from women, voices from indigenous and peasant communities. Because these are voices of people who are so intimately connected to the land. They're sentient beings who know so much about the places that they inhabit that to not include them in the conversation is just crazy. So again, I'll end with the same quote, but I really believe that we need to figure out what's good for the world by knowing these places and letting these places tell us how to function in terms of creating a good food system.
Okay, so I guess I'll fall in suit with another Wendell quote, but be a popular theme. I want to thank Labo for going before me and kind of paving the way for what I'm about to say. I'm speaking kind of on the issue of ownership and power of our food system, and it's kind of an important topic that I saw underlying a lot of the conversations we had, especially who is in control of our food system and who gets to determine what good food is. I wanted to question as well the effectiveness of current organizations and institutions involved with the production of our food. It felt like a lot of these people were talking about either individual behavior or governmental large institutional policy. So I kind of wanted to add a little evidence to what people are doing on their own to take back ownership of their food systems. So hopefully I'll give a couple examples of that. I just want to talk a bit about the structure of our current food system and how it's kind of founded on giving benefit to larger, more centralized industrial farms and favoring the centralization of our food system. We have reduced the need for as many people involved in agriculture, and that is great progress, but it has changed the reasons for its practice from subsistence to profit. Now our food system rests in the hands of a few representatives, mainly in the forms of corporations and larger institutions. They're now in charge of many of the large decisions that are made about what is food and how we access food. But now you're seeing a lot of people's movements organizing on their own, taking back ownership of their food, their health, of their economies and their communities, as Lebo kind of gave example to with her experiences in Brazil, not Brazil, but Peru. So I wanted to go and start on the international level of a couple examples I've studied and looked at. The first one is La Via Campesina, which kind of coined the term of food sovereignty, which is not concerned about just the access to food and enough food, but to be under control of the production of food and what gets produced. As well, in India, there's an organization called Navdanya, which is a network of seed keepers and growers who has coined the term seed sovereignty, which is very similar but kind of founded on the idea of seed saving. One group that I had a lot of experience with down in Mexico was the Zapatistas, who I consider kind of a unique example of taking this whole concept of food sovereignty a step further. And they have actually declared autonomy from the Mexican government and have practiced their own self-governance since they rebelled in 1994. One thing I forgot to mention is that my PowerPoint, it's not as colorful or it doesn't have any pictures because I mainly used it to serve as a resource for y'all to look at these examples further on your own. So it's just a bunch of links. Now going back to the United States, you see this rise of urban agriculture. In West Oakland, there's a group called People's Grocery that is founded in West Oakland, where there's a lot of food insecurity and a lack of grocery stores. These people, along with creating an urban farm and access to healthy food, has created an institute called Growing Justice. And they train community members to become leaders and launch their own projects, determining for themselves what is right for that community. In my hometown, or close to it in Durham, there's a group called Seeds with a program called Durham Inner City Growers. Here they run an urban farm, but they hire youth from the inner city to run it and to work for it, selling at the local farmers market. So it's giving them training and experience with actually having a job. Another example is LA Green Grounds, which practices guerrilla gardening, which is the turning of abandoned vacant lots into productive spaces. As you might have heard of also in Detroit, there's been a lot of deindustrialization and a lot of the corporations and jobs has left the area, which instead of leaving a lot of helplessness has created a lot of creativity and resilience and showing that there's a lot of opportunity for urban farms. I'll skip down to Crop Mob, which is another organization I've had some experience with, which started in North Carolina, and it's an example of this type of organizing on a rural setting, where it's a network of young farmers and small-scale farmers that show up at each other's farms and help complete a group project. As well, small-scale farming has proved to provide opportunities for veterans and ex-convicts, showing that there is space and opportunity for them in this type of economy. Farmer Veteran Coalition is a United States network of farmers or veterans who become farmers. And then Dig Deep Farms is an organization in California started by County Sheriff's League to give ex-convicts some source of employment after they get out of jail. Lastly, there's an article that I found of Maine, a Maine town declaring food sovereignty, which in their document they stated that they are no longer subject to the state and federal food safety regulations, which I thought was an interesting example. Here, even in Columbia, you see some examples of people trying to take back control of their food systems. Columbia Center for Urban Agriculture is an example, especially with their opportunity gardens, of people trying to have more involvement with their food and how it's produced. As well, Community Garden Coalition is a volunteer organization trying to create and open up more growing spaces for the community to have. And lastly, Demonstrating Community Agriculture is a group that I just started having experience with, is kind of a labor-intensive CSA where you work for your share, and they grow downtown in St. Joseph Street. Lastly, I just wanted to end with a bunch of resources for y'all that I found a lot of good knowledge in. One I want to point out was a United Nations document from their Trade and Development Summit in 2003, stating that we do need a paradigm shift in our agricultural development. And I also wanted to list opportunities for working on farms because through my experiences on farms, I've seen an increase of people who've actually interned or apprenticed because they want to know more about their food systems, not because they want to become farmers. And these are the questions that I kind of came up with when thinking about these things. And that's it. Thanks.
Thank you all. I think we've had some really great presentations so far today, and really looking forward to the discussions that we'll be having afterwards. So I'll try to make this quick. The gap that I'm trying to address today that not a lot of people talked about, but everybody called for more of, was the idea of education. And this quote hopefully comes from everybody: we need more good food education. I'm a researcher in science education and consider myself an education researcher, and I study the way that people learn about food, and so this is a softball for me, hopefully. But I'll try to make it quick by focusing on some of the work that I do at the Child Development Lab. And the picture there shows some of the children from the Child Development Lab, which is based at the university. You can walk to it in like 2 minutes, and there are children in the garden there holding a recent harvest of kale. And my dissertation research is in a class that I work on with Mary Hendrickson. It's assessing agroecological decision-making in an upper-level sustainable agriculture course. And so I kind of look throughout the lifespan how people learn about food. And I focus on learning instead of education because in short, learning is not necessarily always the outcome of education. It's not direct and linear that way. And so if I focus too much on education, I might miss the learning that happens. And I'll talk a little bit about that today. And kind of what other folks have talked about, there are different approaches or philosophies towards education, and kind of what I'm interested in is an educational philosophy that encourages participation and encourages ownership in food and the food system. So yeah, how people learn about food, that happens in school and out of school. It happens all the time. And I think primarily it happens through our mealtime practices, but if I were to ask people about food education, they might start thinking about nutrition education or garden education, places when people are directly taught about food. But like I said, I don't think that that's when they necessarily learn the most. They learn about food when they're watching TV. They learn about food when when people are enjoying meals together and all those different things. And so the work that I do in the Child Development Lab, I started focusing kind of on mealtime and mealtime practices and really focusing on what happens during that time. And I have a quote up there that it says, "Spinach has dirt in it." And I was participating in a family-style meal service that we have at the Child Development Lab. It was in a 4-year-old classroom, and a child looked at me, and I was talking about the spinach that we were served. It was boiled spinach as part of our lunch, and he told me with all certainty that spinach has dirt in it, and they also followed up and said that spinach is the same thing as seaweed, which I thought was pretty funny. And in general, the practice is for teachers to talk about the food while we're sitting at the table, and so I was doing that, and I told them that, yeah, sometimes spinach might have dirt in it. It gets gritty sometimes when it grows, and it's hard to get off all the dirt. But the spinach that we're having probably doesn't have very much dirt in it, but he didn't really listen to that, and I thought I was teaching him something, but it didn't really stick that way. And I also told him that seaweed is very different than spinach, and I really like seaweed, and maybe I'd bring a seaweed salad in sometime for him to taste and talk about how it's connected to my kind of ethnicity as a Japanese American and all this other stuff, which is generally advocated for in early childhood education. But then I also, because I'm a garden educator, took it a little bit further, and we happen to have spinach growing in the garden. And within the next couple of weeks, we harvested that spinach, and we took some time to wash it and clean it, and talked about how we need to make sure we remove the dirt and all that kind of stuff. I was in a position of privilege that allowed me to change some of the things that were served during the lunch. And so I actually called a local farmer and asked them if they could give us some spinach to serve in a salad, and asked that farmer to come into class to host a tasting lesson to talk about growing spinach and all those different types of things. And I observed the lunch service that day. We have these observation booths in the Child Development Lab. And the child who initially said spinach has dirt in it and also refused to eat it initially, he did taste it. I saw him taste the spinach. And I went back into the class, I think it was 2 or 3 weeks afterwards, and I was sitting down at mealtime, and he said, spinach has dirt in it, and wouldn't eat the spinach that was being served that day. And also told me that milk is coffee, or milk is the same thing as coffee. And that caught like wildfire, and everybody at the table, there were 6 of them, talking about how spinach has dirt in it, and coffee has milk, and all this other stuff. So, in short, what we teach isn't necessarily what is learned, and we went to great extents to try to cover that, but it didn't necessarily work in that way. And so I talked about we kind of make some menu changes, and we've completely renovated or overhauled the menus that we have in the Child Development Lab, really trying to focus mostly on the health aspects of it. And we sent out a survey to the parents in the Child Development Lab, asked them what they were concerned about related to the food. They gave us the same answers that the nutritionist gave us, which is that they wanted more fresh fruits and vegetables, they wanted more proteins at snacks and at breakfast, and more whole grains. And so we made those changes. And there were significant trade-offs in affordability, though. Our costs probably went up by about 20 to 30%. And we had to be able to justify that to the parents who were ultimately paying for that additional cost of the food. And in terms of fare, the chef who cooks the lunch for 100 children out of a closet, similar to the kitchen that Labo showed, she has to work more and do more work without any necessarily additional time or additional resources, so it becomes pretty difficult. And then green, saving the time that we purchased 8 pounds of lettuce from a farmer that doesn't use chemical herbicides or pesticides. I have not even opened up the can of worms of trying to source more sustainably grown food for the program, but I think that there are plenty of opportunities to try to do that. So I use this as an example just to kind of show that it's pretty difficult to do those things. I have the sweet potatoes there, and we just added sweet potatoes into our winter menu because it's seasonal. And I was speaking with a local farmer who also has access to a certified kitchen, and it's possible that we're going to be able to get the sweet potatoes purchased from this farmer who will be able to cut them, prepare them, and have them so that they could go into our lunch service without much additional labor, and also at a competitive price to U.S. Foods or Walmart, which is where we purchase most of our food. And actually, we're required to purchase most of our food from those vendors. So I have these questions here that hopefully we'll have a chance to talk about in our breakout discussion sessions. But I think there are plenty of opportunities to try to coordinate with local farmers to be able to pay them fairly for high-quality, sustainably raised produce, but it just is going to take a matter of getting our heads together and figuring it out. How do people learn about food? I don't have the answer to that yet. I think that there are a whole bunch of different ways, but if you're interested in studying those things, I'd like to talk to you, and you could surely help me out. There's plenty of work to do. And also thinking about what different experiences help that learning occur better, and are the practices healthy, fair, affordable, and sustainable? So does it make sense to have a garden educator at a school? And how do we go about trying to justify that, or paying for it, or considering what that means? And I think that more attention needs to be paid on the role of cafeteria workers who are helping provide good food education. And how do we allow them to advocate for themselves and hear their voices? I think that's it.
Okay, so now it's your turn to participate in the conversation. Hopefully, the audience will sort of divide itself among these 5 groups. If not, we'll do a little recombining on the fly if we have to. Labo came at it from the perspective of place and landscape. Why don't you cluster in this front corner? Matt from ownership and control, maybe in the back corner. Joe, consumer perspective in the center. Chris, learning in the back corner, and Leslie, production in the front corner over here. So if you'll rearrange yourselves, we'll allow some time for you all to have a discussion.